a phone is a great thing to have, but you can get a terribly, really a false sense of security. A lot of problems can happen very, very quickly. In the Arctic especially, you fall through the ice, get attacked by the polar bear. In the Amazon or in New Guinea, where I was on that particular occasion, a helicopter is going to find it very, very difficult to extract you from rainforest, whereas local people can carry you out. So I always felt more secure investing my strategy, as it were, with local people who were experts in their field rather than outsiders who were a long way away and didn't understand what was going on.
That is, we'll come back. I want to full circle back to this. I've done a lot of expeditions and exploration in my time, but I want to come back and talk to you about an experience I had. But let's just stick with this because I did have it on my list. But there's as I did my research for our conversation today, there's some things out there that say you didn't want to be rescued by the Daily Mail. I mean, come on, let's cross that bridge. I mean, were you looking to be rescued? Did they impose themselves on you? I mean, what's the truth of the story?
I suppose we should explain what happened. Unknown to me, the world was getting worried. I was late getting out of the forest, so that I had completed my expedition actually, and was now heading towards the outside world, and found my way blocked by two warring factions, so I couldn't get through. I now had malaria and dengue fever.
We Get Outdoors Nation, here we are again, and I've got the best job on planet Earth because every day of the week I get to talk to somebody who has done something remarkable. Last week, we've got a guy who runs ultra marathons with pancreatic cancer that's slowly going to kill him. And today, we've got somebody who I think arguably is maybe one of the greatest explorers of the past little while. But we're going to find out more about this gentleman, of where he's been, what he's done, and maybe what his version of summiting Mount Everest has been, because I bet there's been a few of his versions of it. It's Mr. Benedict Allen. Welcome to the We Get Outdoors podcast.
Thank you very much.
It's amazing to have you here. And as I said to you a minute ago, I always like to start with something that grabs people by the scruff of the throat. Now, in the research, I learned about this initiation ceremony you went through into the crocodile's nest. Just spill the beans. Tell us about it. Why were you there? What did it involve? How did you survive? So on and so forth.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was young, naive, quite idealistic, I suppose. I'd already had one big adventure, one big expedition. I'd always wanted as a child to become an explorer, and I didn't have enough money, so I worked in a warehouse, went off to the Amazon. And it was a bit of a disaster. I mean, I achieved what I wanted to do, which was to cross through the north of the Amazon, but I very nearly died. I had malaria, two sorts of malaria. In fact, I almost starved to death, scrambled out of the forest, taking several weeks to get out. Essentially, to cut a long story short, I've been attacked by gold miners and ran for my life. So very nearly died. And I think, looking back, this left me with a need to come to terms with the rainforest that had almost killed me. And if you imagine as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old being alone for 3 or 4 weeks, fighting for your life, it probably does do something to you. Anyway, I ended up in New Guinea. I didn't want to go back to the Amazon. I thought, I need to understand this forest. And I found myself living in an area called the Sepik, which is in northern Papua New Guinea. And in a community called the Nyara people of the Sepik. They had a crocodile cult. That's what the anthropologists would say, a crocodile cult. And essentially they looked to the crocodile as a sort of role model. And every boy had to go through a terrible sounding ceremony to make them a man as strong as a crocodile. And you were locked away in what they call a crocodile nest. A big arena was erected around the spirit house. A sort of big fence of bamboo. This was the crocodile nest. You'd be led in there as a young, or oldish boy, say 15-year-old boy, and you'd be made into a man as strong as a crocodile. It was a secret ceremony, a sacred ceremony, and it was central to the lives of the Nyara. And I thought, if I want to try and understand these people, the Nyara, and how they cope with their swampy forest, I should try and do whatever the locals do. And one young man who'd been through the ceremony said to me, look, if you call yourself an explorer, you should have the courage of your convictions. And that sort of consolidated in my mind. I thought, okay, I'll see if I can go through the ceremony. As I say, I was very naive. I didn't know that the ceremony involved a certain amount of challenges. For example, the man who told me about the ceremony and challenged me to go through it, he had scars up and down his chest and back, hundreds and hundreds of raised stipules, which were like for a crocodile skin. So I noticed there was that feature to the ceremony. But being a 24, 25-year-old, very idealistic. Exploration, as we know, it's been a history of imperialism through the centuries. And I thought, no, turn to the locals, understand how they do things. That's what I should do. Anyway, I remember some elders jumping up and down with excitement. And I said, what's happening? What's going to happen? They said, we can't believe it. The first outsider ever is going to go through the ceremony. And it's you. And I thought, why are they getting so excited? Anyway, my head was shaven. I was led into the crocodile nest with, I suppose, a dozen other initiates, the local people. And we were given little grass skirts, and in we went into the crocodile nest. We were laid onto our backs and cut repeatedly with bamboo blades. We lost about 2 pints of blood. I suppose there's a litre if you're metric. And I wasn't adding up how much blood left me, but I mean, you got the idea. I mean, it's blood everywhere, and it was somewhat painful being cut repeatedly. Went on for maybe an hour or so. I was left to last because everyone wanted to cut their son first, and I didn't have a father to look after me. Anyway, so I was standing around waiting for my turn. Anyway, it was bad. It was bad. That was the first day, and unfortunately, it turns out you had to earn your marks, these sacred marks of the Nyara. And that's now what happened. We were told to sing happy little songs while we danced around the spirit house within the crocodile nest, and we were repeatedly beaten with sticks. And this went on 5 times a day. 5 is a sort of a sacred number for the Nyara. So everything had to be done 5 times, including the beatings. And, it's just it wasn't my sort of thing. I don't know whether you would have enjoyed it, Rob, but it was just, I'd just been beaten every day. I just thought this was terrible. It went on for 6 weeks. And I've yet to hear of a ceremony as brutal as this. Everyone's crying. But we learned very quickly that we weren't going to be allowed out of the ceremony until we had earned the respect of the elders. And this was all about toughening us up. It's all about learning your strengths and weaknesses. So a huge amount of lessons during the ceremony.
How did you hold yourself together for all that time period?
I think a lot of it was knowing I would let down this community hugely if I disappeared out of the crocodile nest. And in fact, the elders threatened me and said, if you leave, we'll kill you. These may have been empty threats, but there was no doubt about it. The village, the community had opened themselves up in the minds of other villagers. They could be decadent or weak, letting a foreigner go through their ceremony. And I looked to my fellow initiates. I was still young, I was only 24, I suppose. And I was about the oldest amongst our age group. But I looked to them. I just thought, I can't let them down, these young people and the villagers who've given me this privilege after all. It may have been painful, very painful, but it was also a privilege to see what the ritual involved. And there's certain secret aspects that I've never told people about, but essentially it was about learning to look to each other and forget your differences. That's an interesting thing, because I come from, my dad was a test pilot, so I was moving around the UK quite a lot, but I come from essentially Europe, and obviously this wasn't my culture. And yet we all had to forget our differences, whether we were generous or mean or meek or mild, or whatever our personalities, whatever our backgrounds. Obviously, I was the odd one out. I mean, I'm almost 2 meters tall. The locals are a lot shorter than me, but it didn't seem to matter, and that's what the ceremony was all about. It's about working together, because in a place like the rainforest, you can't do things alone. Humans are very weak physically. Mentally, they're extraordinary, but physically, humans are very weak. So we have to work together socially. And that's what the ceremony is all about, forgetting your differences and combining together. That was a great lesson for me personally.
How did you change as a person through that? I mean, the reason I ask is we've got the Xhosa tribes in and around where I live now in South Africa. And I've spoken to many of the young men who've been through the Xhosa initiation, 1 to 2 week long ceremonies. They go to initiation school. 3% die every year. And they talk about parameters in their mind being stretched in terms of tiredness, and how whenever you think you're tired, you're not really, and in terms of how far you can go, and so on and so forth. What was it that changed inside of you as a 25-year-old when you left that experience? What was different?
I think my first thought was, how lovely only to have a ceremony that went on a few weeks. But no, I'm joking aside. Joking aside, and people can be stretched in all sorts of ways, and it is an interesting thing that the strongest human on earth would only last against a hungry lion, say, a few minutes. And that's the strongest of us. So we are very weak. And actually, in any ceremony, you only need a couple of days of sleep deprivation and being bewildered by a new experience or humiliated. That can break you down incredibly quickly. So I'm joking very much about other people's cultures. I don't. And I respect the process very much, because the elders, in my case, they knew exactly how to press the buttons, as it were. And I suppose what I learned, there were a lot of other aspects. We were force-fed, didn't get much sleep, and so on. I suppose we were broken down and built up in the way that the army often does with recruits. And I think it was not so much that I learned my strengths as I learned my weaknesses. I learned that I was, I suppose I felt, it's difficult to put in words really, but I suppose I had come out there feeling rather, I wouldn't say proud, but I come out there, by the age of 25, I'd already learned to handle myself in rainforest. And I thought I was quite good at it, not compared to the locals, but compared to most people of my culture back in Europe or the West. And here I was sort of brought down to nothing. And I think gradually, as I got stronger and stronger, I re-emerged as someone who thought very much less about myself and more about the others. So I'm not saying that I was selfish, but nonetheless, as someone who'd had this childhood dream to be an explorer, I was very driven, and it's my vision of what I wanted to do. Now it had a much broader perspective, and I thought I won't survive very long alone. Indiana Jones wouldn't actually last very long in reality, because he'd be seen as a threat. And I learned very soon that I had to be much more humble, be much more sensitive, and listen and learn. And often that meant being with children and later on different expeditions, because children have that same open-minded spirit of inquiry. So I learned a lot of humility, which is very ironic, because the ceremony is all about emerging from the crocodile nest as a crocodile man. And actually, deep inside, we'd learnt that we had to be rather caring of each other. It's not what you'd think. And that was quite an insight, because the Nyara are seen as macho people, a history of headhunting and so on. The people up and down the river are very scared of them. So they're tough people. But like a lot of boxers, we had learned a lot of self-discipline. I don't know if you've known any boxers or professional fighters. They're the last people who'd actually go in and start a brawl in a pub, usually, because they've learned themselves. They've learned they don't need to prove themselves. They've been through hell. know yourself, you know your weaknesses and strengths, and you're confident. But with that confidence comes a sort of humility. You have to listen and learn from others, learn from your enemies as well as your friends.
Now let's rewind a few years. One of the things I'm always curious about by people who've done, I say extraordinary things, but things that go beyond where most people go to, is what was it about your childhood that sowed the seed for you of I'd like to be an explorer, but then equally permitted you, I see you went to Bradfield College, which actually is just down the road from where I used to live. You had a good education, at a good school. There would have been a thought in my mind that maybe you might have gone to a good university like an Oxford or something, and then joined the military as an officer for a few years, and then stepped into the exploration world, because that's a very stereotypical sort of explorer path. So what was it about the childhood and upbringing that pushed you in this direction and to tread your own path?
My dad was a test pilot, as I mentioned, and I don't know if you remember, there was a plane called the Vulcan Bomber. Very charismatic aircraft. It's delta winged, they say nowadays, like Concorde, and it used to carry the British nuclear deterrent. So my dad was a test pilot on the V bombers, Vulcan and 2 other planes, and so this was incredibly exciting to me as a boy, a little boy, maybe I was probably 3, 4, 5 years old, looking up and seeing my dad fly this plane overhead and tipping the wings, to say it was him, and that this sort of thing had a huge effect. I think mainly because I was, well, I was just proud of my dad, but I think personally it made me feel things are possible that wouldn't normally be seen as possible, and my dad, I understood, was a pioneer. In those days, test pilots, well, Armstrong, the first bloke who walked on the moon, he was a test pilot. So it was a very glamorous thing to do. But it made me feel I could be some sort of pioneer too. And the reason why I think that's important is that I wasn't a pioneer type. I didn't seem to be. I wasn't a particular team player. I wasn't particularly good at sports. I was a little bit anti-establishment as I grew up. I didn't want to be in the army or anything formal like that. I seemed to need to do my own thing. And my dad had shown me how he could do his own thing. And it just a sort of great role model, seeing someone succeed around you. And I just decided I was going to be some sort of explorer. I knew I couldn't trust myself in the plane. I'm much more, I wouldn't say flighty, but I'm a bit more restless than my dad. In the end, a test pilot has to be totally locked on his task. And I am in a crisis, but the rest of the time, I'm not really. And so I thought, I do have to do it my own way. I clung on to this idea of being some sort of romantic explorer, very naive, very silly, really, a lot of my early dreams. But they developed, I became a fossil hunter as a little boy. Then I began doing little treks around the UK. And finally, at university, I read environmental science because I thought somehow I've got to be an explorer, and the environment is a great thing to learn about. It's the nearest you can get to a degree. And then the reality struck, which was I didn't have money. It's true, I went to a nice school, private school. That was mainly my granny who saved up, or spent her savings. It wasn't my dad. He didn't have much money. I don't know where my dad's money went, actually. Maybe test pilots weren't paid very much in those days. I don't know. Anyway, he didn't seem to have that much money. And but I went to that school, and the reality struck after university. No money. So I worked in a warehouse thinking I'll just give it a go. And went off to South America. It's a fairly nebulous idea of crossing between the Orinoco Delta and the Amazon Delta. And the idea was just go and ask for help from the local people, because they don't have any money either. And they know how to cope in the Amazon and the forest, the jungle, And so I just turned up, this sort of innocent foreigner who didn't have a clue what he was doing. And people felt sorry for me, I think. They're very, very good to me. A whole number of different communities just took me in. Perhaps they didn't want me to die on their hands, so they moved me on to the next community. But I gradually succeeded in crossing an extremely remote bit of northern Amazon in Brazil. And yes, I pulled off the journey, but as I mentioned earlier, it had all went badly wrong at the end. I came across some gold miners. They tried to chase me with knives. I don't know whether they thought I'd stolen their gold or what. I didn't stop to ask. I'm sure you would have said, "Excuse me, why are you chasing me?" Anyway, I just ran, jumped into my canoe capsized, and I started walking. And that was this traumatic early stage. But I got away with it. But I think this is what now made me need to go through that ceremony, really. Otherwise, I certainly had an impulse to understand much better, in a much more serious way, how the locals lived in an environment that had almost killed me.
It's remarkable. And were you inspired in your childhood or at university by explorers of times gone past? You know, your Shackletons or whoever they may well be. Were they people you were really aware of and inspirational to you, or was that?
Yeah, to an extent. I think I recognized the impulse that they all had, but I also knew I wasn't quite their type. You mentioned earlier that the classic explorer it has a military background. So Shackleton, Speke, Burton, so many of them. Scott, of course. I knew I wasn't this sort of team player. I sort of felt I had to somehow find my own way of doing it. And also I was incredibly restless to get on with it. I didn't want to wait till I was in my late 20s to Scott. So all these people had to wait till they have a huge experience to lead one of these big expeditions. I wanted to get on with it, mainly because perhaps I felt this is something I won't be able to do for the most of my life, because I won't have the funds or money. I knew I was sort of going to have to be a lone operator somehow. Didn't know how I was going to get any money. So I thought I'd just give it a go once, as I said, and see where it takes me. But I had this rebellious streak, and I think I also felt I don't want to be one more white person going in there and not, well, just imposing my own views. So I think there was that side as well. I thought turn to the local people as part of my rebellion, not do it the Scott way or so on. But I did admire these characters. I mean, Livingstone, 32 years out in Africa, writing his diary in berry ink at one stage, presumably because he ran out of ink. Maybe like the colours of berries, but never thought of that. I think he must have run out of ink. So these people pressing on regardless. Formidable stories, not just the Brits, but Amazon, Mackenzie. There's doesn't. I used to collect all these stories. One person in South Africa, I love Lawrence van der Post, who I went on to meet much later on. I loved his approach because he seemed more like me. I thought he's someone who's quietly gone to the Kalahari. Do you know this book, The Lost World of the Kalahari?
I do know it, yeah.
Yeah. So quietly went and listened to the Bushmen. So I loved him. And that I thought that's more me, Lawrence van der Post, quietly listening. And but yeah, I thought in the end I've got to sort of make it work for myself. And I was desperate to get on with it. So off I went.
It's interesting that at first glances, many people would say that for a lot of your explorations, you've been maybe either vastly under-resourced or vastly under-prepared. If you were an outsider looking in and you were also benchmarking it against a Scott or an Amundsen or somebody like that who's got big crews of people and they've got all of these resources. But then my mind goes that maybe your experience is far richer because you actually have to go and use what's about you and learn from the people about you, as opposed to just being an imperialist who says, I'm here to colonize the Amazon or Papua New Guinea or somewhere like that.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think first I tried to sort of express this, but I did it. It was a financial solution at first. I'm making myself sound a bit grand the way I was talking about my sort of emerging philosophy, perhaps. But it was a financial solution. I couldn't think how to do anything of my own because I didn't have any money, and I couldn't recruit a team. No one would sponsor me. So I turned to local people as a way of, on that first expedition to the Amazon, as a way of just doing it. And then I think my philosophy evolved, and I thought this is the right way, certainly for me. And yes, you can say I was underprepared, because the whole idea was you go out there, do your preparation in the Amazon, in the Arctic, in the Kalahari or Namib, and not here. I think I'm more prepared than people think. I like to think that. But I certainly, by having a vulnerability, I was much more open to experience, much more open to learning. And vulnerability in my mind became a good thing. It's a dangerous thing, because if things go wrong, you've got very little fallback. So typically on my expeditions, I wouldn't take a GPS, I wouldn't take a satellite phone, I would take a map, but often that map was pretty useless. So there was a deliberate attempt to cut myself off. It wasn't that I just could quite afford the phone or anything like that, or that I didn't want to prepare. It was no, trust the local people and learn from them. But you've got to be careful. You've got to really build up a base. And my help, my resource would be the local people, not back home. There still would be that preparation. There still would be that backup, as you call it, but the backup would be invested locally. And I don't know if we'll get on to this, but my last big expedition in New Guinea, things went wrong. I was trapped. I couldn't get out to the forest, and eventually I did. But there was two warring factions, and I had malaria and dengue fever, and a lot of people criticised me for not taking a phone. But in the end, the news of where I was brought to the outside world through the local people who I trusted, and they trekked in 3 different directions to get word to the outside world that I was stuck in the forest, and that's how I got out. And it would have been much harder if I just had a phone and said, "Hello, here I am. I'm in the forest." It would be much harder to get me out. And that is how the world heard about my plight, and it wasn't to do with me phoning and trying to get help in. It was through the trust I'd invested, all I had in the local people. I always feel if a phone is a great thing to have, but you can get a terribly, really a false sense of security. A lot of problems can happen very, very quickly. In the Arctic especially, you fall through the ice, get attacked by the polar bear. In the Amazon or in New Guinea, where I was on that particular occasion, a helicopter is going to find it very, very difficult to extract you from rainforest, whereas local people can carry you out. So I always felt more secure investing my strategy, as it were, with local people who were experts in their field, rather than outsiders who were a long way away and didn't understand what was going on.
That is, we'll come back. I want to full circle back to this. I've done a lot of expeditions and exploration in my time, but I want to come back and talk to you about an experience I had. But let's just stick with this, because I did have it on my list. But there's, as I did my research for our conversation today, there's some things out there that say you didn't want to be rescued by the Daily Mail. I mean, come on, let's cross that bridge. I mean, were you looking to be rescued? Did they impose themselves on you? I mean, what's the truth of the story?
I suppose we should explain what happened. Unknown to me, the world was getting worried. I was late getting out of the forest, so that I had completed my expedition actually, and was now heading towards the outside world, and found my way blocked by 2 warring factions, so I couldn't get through. I now had malaria and dengue fever, so things were not looking brilliant for me. And the world was thinking, where is he? You know, 1 or 2 people cared, mainly my wife, I think. And so I was late getting out, and the Daily Mail decided they wanted to come and rescue me, which was lovely. I didn't know about any of this. I was just sitting in this airstrip at this abandoned mission station, it had been abandoned because of the fighting. So it's a strange place anyway. A lot of bewildered people around there. And we know it's not quite clear what has happened, but I sent 3 lots of people in different directions to try and get word that I was stuck, and please send a plane in, which is fairly normal procedure. A lot of missionary airplanes flying backwards and forwards in New Guinea. I thought, could you just pop in, pick me up, and everything will be okay? That didn't happen. And I couldn't understand why. What I do know now is that, the Daily Mail had come around the world to rescue me all the way from Kensington in the heart of London. This expedition, as it were, was launched around to try and get me. So what happened exactly, we still don't really know, but it looks like, because everyone thought I was okay, because I'd sent word that I was okay. But time had gone by and it wasn't any more okay, but the Daily Mail told everyone to stand down, don't bother sending a plane in to pick me up, because we're going to rescue him anyway. So it's a sort of slightly complicated situation that may not be very interesting after all to you, but it's the long and short is I didn't want to be rescued. I just wanted a passing plane to pick me up, because that was always part of my plan. Wherever I was going to emerge, I managed to get help from the outside world on my terms. I didn't want the outside world to intervene, if only because it sends a really bad signal. If you've just entrusted your life to local people and told them, look, you've got to believe I am just as valuable as you. We're all in this together. No one's going to get rescued. We're friends. Above all, you're not guides, we're friends. And you build up this bond together and you do everything together, cutting through the rainforest, lighting fires in the rain, sharing food. Then suddenly, there was I, the white man, rescued by a helicopter that had come from heaven knows where. It was sending all the wrong signals. So I didn't want to be rescued. It was just like a betrayal of my own principles. And didn't make me look very good from the local people's point of view. It sort of reinforced this idea that a white man is actually worth much more than them. So that's why I was against rescuing. I wanted it to be on my terms, which was the local people's terms. How it wasn't picked up by local helicopters or planes, I don't know yet, but I've sort of put it aside.
It's very interesting. I was, in the late 90s, I spent a few years in the Himalayas and eventually got asked to leave Nepal because I had a 6-month visa and I'd been there for well over 6 months. And on a plane back to the United Kingdom, I was looking at the in-flight magazine and I saw this beautiful blue line running from roughly the equator north up towards the Mediterranean, which we'd now know to be the White Nile. And I had a few $100s and I booked a flight when I got back to the UK to Entebbe and took my kayak and myself. And I got all of these very peculiar responses. My mum didn't speak to me for a long time. I was in my early 20s at that point in time. And she hadn't raised a child to go and kill himself in Central Africa, I think was pretty much there was a civil war and stuff. And the reason I mentioned all of this, because I spent almost a month on the White Nile on my own, sleeping rough and whatever else. Rob, didn't ever have any concern for other than being shot at by the LRA. I mean, I did have a concern then when the AK-47 rounds are coming past you. That gets a bit bum clenching. But apart from that, I didn't have any worry for my own safety or my own ability to survive. I mean, of course, I got dengue fever. I got all that stuff happens. But what really blew my mind was other people were far more worried about me than I was about me. And I suppose my question for you is, linking out of that, is you've obviously got family and friends and a wife and all sorts of things. And there you are in Papua New Guinea or wherever it may well be, in Russia or somewhere. And do you always feel confident in your own ability? And then how do you assist those people back home to know that Benedict will be fine?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I know that feeling you had hugely, because I just think it is always worse for the people left behind. It must be the same with any fighting, any war. Just you're left there to wonder what is happening now. And I still feel guilty about my mum and dad, all through my 20s, through my 30s, time and time again. I wasn't just away for a month or two. It was, 6 months, time and again. And of course, without any contact. No, I didn't phone. I just disappeared. Um, I suppose a couple of things spring to mind. One is that we are all so connected nowadays that if someone disappears, I was only the Daily Mail came to rescue me only after about me being 5 days late. And Rob, 5 days it's nothing. You can just get stuck by, maybe you have to go back downriver because you've left your rucksack somewhere, or maybe a bridge has collapsed, you've got to make a new one. In the big scheme of things, it's not very long, but we're not used to absence anymore. There was a time, well, when I was much younger, but even before I was born, when people just used to set off, I think they called it the magic bus. People went off to Morocco for 3 weeks on a little bus, and people just used to disappear and used to get, I do remember this, used to pick up letters from home at a post restaurant address in some post office somewhere. And this was normal. People just disappear for 2 or 3 weeks, and that was just part of growing up. And pretty well everyone did it. Well, certainly sort of middle class people, but it's a very common thing. But now, if people are absent for a day, people start to get worried. I find that disturbing. I think you need to learn to let your child go. But of course, it's so hard as a parent, because I am one now. That's what's so terrible. I've got 3 little children, and I worry about them, because I worry about them crossing a road, because that is equally dangerous. But what happens, of course, as you grow up, you learn to cross the road. And what is actually a very dangerous thing for these vehicles going, killing machines zooming by, you just learn to handle them. Same as you did with your kayak. You learn to handle the crocodiles, the trees that might come down, the dengue fever, the this and the that. And the key, of course, is try and make mistakes young and make those mistakes small, so that you build up resilience. You second guess almost instinctively what could go wrong. And of course, you can be caught out. So you have to try and think beyond the thinkable. You have to think of every single permutation of what happens. But in New Guinea, I have been doing this for decades. For me, it was a pretty straightforward trek that I was embarked on. I always knew there was a risk of dengue fever. I knew the key was local people, the Papuans who were with me. And I was never seriously worried till suddenly, at the end, no one was coming to go and get me. But on the expedition, by this stage, people writing about me being held prisoner by headhunters and heaven knows what people were imagining. But for me, it was one more expedition that I had spent a lifetime learning to manage.
I think people in the outside world don't realize that on an expedition or exploration, 5 minutes is 5 days, or maybe vice versa. Or even 5 seconds. You can slip off the edge of a cliff and break your neck in 5 seconds. You're not going to starve to death in 5 days. It won't be very comfortable or very nice, but you'll be fine for a couple more weeks. And it'll be pretty brutal, but you'll be all right. But I think people are so used when they're making decisions like the Daily Mail were for you, for whatever reasons, you're in Kensington where there's a Marks and Spencer's and a Tesco's and a Waitrose around the corner. And, if you're hungry at 11:55, well, lunch is at 12. It's very, you almost can't appreciate what a remote location or an exploration is like unless you've actually gone and done it. You can't make decisions.
But also, I think, sorry.
You're not necessarily making the right decision for people from that standpoint either, because you're measuring their peril against not their peril, their maybe future or their current status against something that, I don't know. It's like trying to measure something in centimeters using an inch ruler. Do you know what I mean? It's just not the same thing.
Yeah, but I think I should be, express my gratitude, because actually in the end people cared for me, and that was a great thing. It's my wife, my agent, and the Daily Mail. They wanted to bring about me getting safely home, and that was a good impulse. It wasn't as if they didn't care, and they were actually very decent people, though, the people who popped out of the helicopter, and I was very grateful to be whisked away. But it's very, very hard for someone like me I had to work so hard through my life to maintain control of expeditions and things, and suddenly to have it all whisked apart is just very hard personally. But I can't blame anyone out there for rescuing me, as they felt they had to do. And it's one of those tricky things. But the accepted norm now is take a phone, take a GPS. And for me, this still is a problem, and it should be a solution. And people will say, I'm sure people watching this will say, this is just ridiculous. Does he think he's living still? We're not living in the dark ages. This is modern day. We can all be connected. Why not spare your wife, loved ones, the agony? But I would say that part of the justification for me for going off is actually that I do separate off. Other adventurers, explorers can do it their way. But in the end, the value to me of what I do is that I do separate myself off. As I mentioned, we're so connected now. I'm not a very high-tech person, but right by me is my phone, and I communicate all the time on it. But we all know the dangers of being in our own little echo chambers, rumors going round and round, churning around. They call it journalism in the newspapers. And that's just them. They're meant to be professional informers. But we're all part of this. And it's actually more important now than ever, it seems to me, that certain people step aside. It's what my skills are for, I think. Most people wouldn't have the inclination to do what I do, and that's fair enough as well. I think it's actually very important for people to take risks, step away from our society and evaluate the world on their own terms. And after all, I'm meant to be professional. I've always come back, despite having been shot at, despite having had malaria 5 times, and heaven knows what has happened. But I've still made it back, and that's my job.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've got some 80,000 followers in the United States alone, and one of the things I've been very curiously tracking over the past, I've been working in the outdoors since the age of 16, or I've been certainly engaging as my profession. Whether you call it work or not is a whole different story. But I've noticed that the phone and the GPS and the spot transmitter rather, or the EPIRB, that people are writing checks with those things that their bodies really can't cash. They take themselves to places without the necessary skill set of navigating by the sun, the moon, and the stars. For instance, navigating by feel, following ridge lines and distinct direct. You've probably done a lot of that. Using local hand-drawn maps as opposed to a topographic map of some sort. And what I've been noticing is that the accidents or the people getting lost or dying seems to get more the more that we get reliant on technology. The batteries die at some point in time. You do have blank spots where you can't send a message. And I wonder whether the pendulum is swinging too far at the moment. And this is just a wonder, in as much as there's an over-reliance on technology without the ability to do it the old-fashioned way. And I think both have a place.
Yes, I tend to agree, but I think it starts in childhood almost, that instinctive feeling of just having to work things out for yourself and just sense your environment without any interruption, without any aids, is incredibly important. I suppose you would say, anyone might say, well, I would think this anyway, but I just think it is very, I think they're dangerous, these instruments. They should be there to help us, but there's a danger, because once you have that, then what happens? Well, you learn to use it, and then you haven't got it, and then suddenly you're in trouble because you're exposed. And I think you're right. As I said earlier, I think being vulnerable is actually very important. And part of the reason why it's important is that you don't develop too much reliance on things around you being right all the time. If you're vulnerable, you're always a little bit on edge. If you feel you've got something in your back pocket to get you out of a problem, then you haven't got that sense of vulnerability. You're actually not feeling you're exposed at all, and therefore you can walk into danger much more. But if you're always thinking, "Oh, I've got to keep a sense of where the moon is, where the north is, where south is, feel the landscape, feel my body, how well I'm responding." If you can't get out quickly, it's a very, very different expedition. I think you're right though. I mean, people certainly, they head off without really thinking things through, but worse than that, they haven't had the years or months or weeks of background of learning how to really handle yourself whatever happens. There's no easy option.
I think of those electric things when I'm training people in the outdoors, which I do quite a lot of, guides and leaders to take people on fancy trips places. I call the electric stuff, they're your third tier resources. And your first tier resource is the ability to feel and use common sense. And the moon, the stars, nature. I mean, we can navigate by the bark on the tree, the fungus, the whatever it may well be, lichen, so on and so forth. So your primaries, and your secondaries is probably good old fashioned paper and compasses and that stuff. And then only once we've got those things dialed do we actually think, well, okay, it could be sensible to have an oh shit thing sealed up in my backpack just in case. Like that could be useful.
Oh shit thing, is that what they're called?
Oh shit thing, like an EPIRB or something. It could be useful.
Yeah. So what do you think, Rob, then, from that perspective, someone training people, do you think what I do is irresponsible then? If I'm not having that special EPIRB or the emergency beacon the way out?
So I think it's context dependent. So if you were responsible for the lives of other Westerners in that environment, I'd say you should have a oh shit thing, because it changes where you are in the world, but a way of going oh shit, because you're responsible for the lives of other people. If you're responsible for yourself, well, I think that comes down to your own purpose of why you're there. And for you, from what I'm hearing, so much of it is linked to engagement with the local indigenous population that maybe you'd put yourself in more danger if you had one of those than in less, because you'd have a false sense of security that they bring. If you're in the Brecon Beacons in the United Kingdom, you probably know it as roughly as well as I do. You're on Penny Fan and you hit the oh shit button on your spot device. You're still there for anywhere from 45 minutes to 4 hours, depending upon whether you get a helicopter or a mountain rescue team come to you. So at that point in time, it's great you've got the button to push, but you need to have the internal resource to be able to look after yourself for that length of time until somebody does arrive.
Yeah.
And if you're in Papua New Guinea, well, yeah, you can hit the oh shit button, but that could be days. In fact, an interesting story, a friend of mine was the first guy to kayak across the Atlantic from Newfoundland to Ireland. And on his first attempt, he's a sergeant in the Special Air Service. He wasn't able, due to work requirements, to monitor the build of his kayak. A very specially built kayak built. And the manufacturer put the one-way water release valve in the kayak in back to front. So he got... Yeah. So it wasn't a kayak, it was a bloody submarine. He got 3.5, 4 days off the coast of Newfoundland, in the what's it called, the jet stream in the current, and his kayak sank, and he hit the EPIRB and whatever else, but he spent 5 days sat on a mid-Atlantic buoy in Helly Hansen thermal and a pair of boxer shorts, waiting to be rescued. And so, yes, he got rescued, and yes, he could make people aware he needed to be rescued, but actually he had to do 5 days. And that's where I think the false security of electronic devices can trip us up. Because unless you've got that resource, I don't know, in Papua New Guinea, if you had an EPIRB or something that you could hit a oh shit button, I mean, how long would it take somebody sensible to get to you and offer you assistance?
Well, it depends where I was. But I suppose, we're talking about days anyway. And as I say, by investing instead in local people, you've sorted the problem out immediately. You're talking about whether search and rescue people will come and get you in the Brecon Beacons. If your team, as it were, fellow travellers on the journey, or the Papuans who you've spent time with, if they're already with you, they are your search and rescue team. You don't need to get any help at all because you've got those resources with you. So for me, there is a philosophical thing anyway, whatever the practicalities. And as I mentioned, in the Arctic, death comes very, very quickly. You fall through the ice, polar bear, a blizzard, hypothermia. So it can be useless anyway, getting any outside help. But in New Guinea, I think it's right to, my specialization is people. So I go wherever I've been around the world. Essentially, I've gone to the local people, indigenous people, and learned skills through them, traveled with them, and sometimes broken away, done things myself. But my base has always been the local people, and they are my EPIRB, they are my sat nav, as it were. For me, it's about a different philosophy in a way. Trust the local people, not the outside world, and I think. It's worked so far.
Well, you're still here telling the story, so it can't be a completely disaster of a strategy.
That's what. But a lot of criticism, as I said in New Guinea, when it was learned that here's this crazy bloke who doesn't believe in taking a phone and all the rest, and people are saying to me, for my next trip, please, whatever happens, just slip a satellite phone in your rucksack, just so it's there. But even that troubles me, because I just feel deep down, I need to know that I can sort out the problem with the help of the Papuans, with whoever I'm with, because that's where my trust should be placed, not in the outside world, but in the local people. And this is to do with the history of exploration. I feel that it's time we listen to local people, trusted to them, but it's also, I think, for practical reasons, that I don't want to have that sense that I'm always be safe somehow, because I think it's that feeling that can get you into terrible trouble because you're not safe necessarily.
Do you think that we're before I ask the question, let me put it in context. So I stumbled across a couple of weeks ago it's a fake picture, but it looks like a poster that Shackleton would have used in 1906 to 1907 to go and advertise for his the crew he wanted to go to the cold places, and the words I can't remember, but it says you're going to starve, you're likely to die. However, if you survive, all fame and fortune will be yours. And I popped it up on social media to see, who would sign up for something like this today. And I've got, 10% of people have said, hell yeah, but they're my friends, so I'm not surprised that they've said stuff like that.
Surrounded by mad people.
That's it, because we've all got, I live on a mountaintop in southern Africa. Leopards go through my back garden. I mean, that's just, so I'm not surprised that my friend said yes. What was most interesting was some of the other remarks I got from people, which are along the lines of, there's no need to have exploration like that today, or only if we had X, Y, and Z. The list of requirements and resources comes out. Which if they took them all would be a 60-kilo backpack. I mean, there's no way you could do less than that. I mean, it would be ridiculous. Or a crew of Sherpas. And so I suppose my wonder is, do you think that humanity is losing its desire, willingness, or even mental ability to actually genuinely explore?
Yes, I suppose it's what is exploration is one thing, but the desire to head off and experience the world is incredibly important. And I think there is a problem because I think we're so urbanized, so used to backup in various forms, so used to connectedness. We are unwilling to face disconnecting. And that's a sort of decadence in a way, because actually we, as we're realizing with the COP talks and so on, the humans haven't done very well at learning how connected we are to the world out there. And we are very connected, whether we like it or not. The planet will carry on regardless, whether we mess up various ecosystems or not and destroy ourselves. Eventually, things will carry on. But we, as humans and mammals, as living creatures, we need each other and to establish that connection. So it's incredibly important that we carry on pushing ourselves, experiencing the world out there. And it's no good saying the days of exploration are over, because the impulse it's in all of us. Actually, it's within all living things, but certainly amongst humans, we need to go out there, report back. And that's the same now as it was in Livingstone's day. Livingstone was reporting to Europe about a world that the Europeans didn't really understand. So Africa, he gave a picture of Africa back to Europe. Fact of the matter is the Africans knew Africa, the Arabs knew Africa, but the Europeans didn't. So it was an important role of recording what he saw and experienced, whether it was truly explored or not by other people. And same now, the world needs to be experienced again and again and again, because it's always changing, and it'll carry on being unexplored. So exploration isn't about going into what we think of as remote societies or remote forests or Arctic wastes. It's about everywhere. And so we have to keep believing that there is a job for explorers, because there is. We all need to go out there and report. And it may not be the romantic figures of Shackleton, Speke, Burton, even Van der Post, exploration in that old-fashioned way. But it is about people being exposed to all sorts of environments. Maybe it's in a slum in some shanty town, or maybe it is in a forest. But we've got to go out there, get out of our comfort zone. Otherwise, we'll just close in on ourselves and be trapped in a sort of the same sort of thinking. So people have to be in jeopardy, and it's no good otherwise. Certain people have to go out there and feel what's out there.
I think early day explorers were primarily, they were exploring, and they were exploring for riches often, but there was a large degree of focus on mapping and cartography as well within it. And I think that's where maybe people get sidelined by the idea of exploration, is that the original guys were mapping and finding out about birds and insects and so on and so forth. And, there's the need for people to go off and do manual mapping these days is close to zero. I mean, Google Maps and Google Earth has done most of that for us with satellites. Not all, but a very large percentage of the animals and wildlife out there has been recorded and seen and experienced. I think that for me, the thing that is most interesting is when you start doing what you're doing and considering the human aspect of it, understanding, Sami alders in Scandinavia, the indigenous people there, just as an example. How are their great-grandfathers living? Well, you're not going to find that from a book. It's going to happen through incidental communication, conversation, and just spending time with them. But equally, I think that people think you have to put your life on the line to go explore. And I don't think that's the case. I think you can explore a gorge in the Brecon Beacons and have a great day out, or I don't know, a beach on the west coast of the United States that you can't easily get to, and spend a few days there. I don't think it has to be as dramatic as once it was. Yeah, I also, Benedict, I think maybe the next, I don't know what your thought is on this, the next old-fashioned expedition, but done in our lifetimes, could well be Elon Musk's pursuit for Mars.
Yeah, I'm very, very against that. I think it's very much not the future, because I feel it's. You mentioned that we explored so much of our planet. We've only named 5, or maybe some people say 8% of the species on our planet, and we don't understand those. There's maybe in the UK is probably 30, 40 species of woodlouse. You know, the little woodlouse thing. And I mentioned that because my tutor at university was a specialist. He was one of the world's specialists on the woodlouse. And he didn't understand the environment of this woodlouse, what its needs were, what its territories were, or how it operated with other species. That's one species in our back garden. So there's a huge amount out there, and yet we see so much environmental destruction here. The UK has got a very trammeled landscape. I think we've lost 49% of our natural cover. Anyway, a huge amount of stuff has just natural environment has gone. And I think to look elsewhere and have one of the richest men on the planet investing millions, billions on going somewhere else is really irresponsible, sending all the wrong signals when we have got so much to sort out here, not just the so-called natural environment, but also among societies that have got to find a way of coping in a time when we've made a mess of so much. So I think he's doing a very wrong thing. I don't think you can stop. Humans have to keep on pushing in different ways, but we've got so much to clear up here. And here's someone doing something that's actually irrelevant to most people's lives and the problems that are so big at the moment that we have to sort out here.
Maybe that trip to Mars is a bit like having an EPIRB or a satellite phone. It gives people a false perception that there is somewhere we can escape to, or a way of getting out. And therefore, we don't have to worry about safety, security, harmony even today, because it's all right, Elon Musk has got our back. So when we bugger up this planet, we'll just go to Mars. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I think he's almost said it. It's like different words, but yes, and I think there's a real danger there, and of course it's far more glamorous, and the imagery and everything out there, the final frontier. It looks like the future out there, but it's such a dangerous thing because it's not as if we're just drifting along and or progressing in a very orderly manner. There are huge existential problems now, and we are becoming increasingly aware of them. But I read environmental science back in 1978 through to 81, and then ecology. So we knew even back then that there are these problems that were building up. The evidence has taken, of course, a couple of decades to build up, but nonetheless, we even just know anecdotally the plastic pollution, all the other problems we've got. These have got to be sorted out first. And these are very basic problems. It's not as if they're superficial. So I think it's wrong. I think I can see why he wants to do it, because it looks exciting. Of course, it's exciting. Gets far more kudos from that than saving the Amazon rainforest, for example. Although perhaps not actually, but anyway, it looks it suits the.
If you watch Star Trek as a child, it's kind of turning Star Trek into your today reality, isn't it? That's the vibe I get.
Yeah, and if it's the brand, exploration being out there, it's squeaky clean and it's new, and forget about the dirty old planets, that we made a mess of. It's sort of all part of the brand. So anyway, I'm obviously not quite a fan. He needs to be taken off into the Amazon by me or someone else, or maybe by you, Rob. Take him on a trek down that gorge. I don't know, sort him out.
I can give him a few experiences within not that far a distance of here that might open some eyes. So something I want to ask you about on my little prep list here is there was a noticeable slowdown in your exploration, sort of pursuit of more explorations in your late 30s, early 40s. And then more books started arriving and whatever else. What was it that caused that slowdown in exploring for you, and maybe more of focusing on other things?
I don't think anyone's ever asked that. I noticed it, but so did you. I think I was burnt out. I found I haven't mentioned most of the other expeditions I've done, but I began worried that it was some sort of formula in a way, that always the same idea: turn to the local people, learn from them, learn skills, and learn to see through the local people that environment. It was very, very tiring, very hard to spend 6 months away in the Amazon. Then I progressed to various rainforests and then desert. I walked up the Namib Desert, Gobi Desert, this sort of place, and then I went to the Arctic with a dog team. So it was getting harder and harder physically, but still the same idea. Months and months away, in what we might call jeopardy, and then coming back. And I found myself sort of trapped in a way. I was either thinking about somewhere else, or I was somewhere else, or I was recovering from being somewhere else, and then writing and recording it, because to justify each of these journeys, I feel you've got to share whatever experience you've had. So I'd write or make programs for the telly. So it was, I was always somewhere else mentally, and I just think I needed a rest. I think nowadays people might say I had post-traumatic stress disorder, because I had got away with a lot of near-death experiences. Famously, in the Amazon, not famously, but for me anyway, it was famous. I was pursued by Pablo Escobar's people. He was hiding out. Do you know about this one?
I don't know about this one, but I do know who Pablo Escobar is, and if his people are chasing you, you've got problems.
Yes, well, I felt so. I was just paddling along my canoe, and it's on the Putumayo River, which is on the border between Peru and Colombia. So there's a lot of cocaine trade going on. The coca leaves were grown in Peru, taken across the border to Colombia, where they're processed. And there's a lot of activity going on anyway, but it's more or less a cottage industry. And I was trying to cross the Amazon basin at its widest point. Unfortunately, it took me past his camp. And Pablo, I'd say Pablo, I never really got to know him, but Pablo he was hiding out. It was about 6 months before he was killed, I think. And he'd come down from Medellin, his headquarters up in the highlands, and was just keeping low down. It was quite near the border between Peru, Colombia, and Brazil, so he could skip across the borders to evade authorities who were now moving in. And there was me paddling by, and he just sent 2 people to get rid of me. And they kept missing. They were. I don't know why I'm laughing, but they were behind me with I can't remember what sort of boat they had, but anyway, they had a rifle in the front, and pew, pew, these bullets went by. And in all seriousness, it was a nightmare, and I got away with it. I got around the river bend, and they didn't manage to get me. And but that in itself was interesting, in that I jumped into the forest. They came by, couldn't see me, and it was a real reminder. This forest that, as a child, I was taught was dangerous, with snakes, piranhas, and all the rest. It was on my side, as it were. I jumped into that forest, and I was hidden immediately. They couldn't pursue me, and I was safe. And this forest was actually on my side. So again, it's not how we think out there. If you can learn to see the rainforest, the Arctic, the Namib as a resource, then you have it on your side.
It's incredible, isn't it? How do you find, I'm just playing around because I'm curious about two things, but I've always struggled with reintegrating myself back into the first world, which is probably why I live in a third world country now. But it's I've always struggled with it. I go somewhere, be it the Arctic in winter, Arctic Norway for 3 months, and then I got back to Oxford or London. That first week, I would just describe it as hell every single time. How have you found it reintegrating yourself? You've got a wife, children, family. How have you found it, or what strategies do you use to reintegrate?
It is funny because I'd say, feel exactly the same. It's one of the toughest things. Heading off is scary and lonely often, but it's also exciting. You establish yourself out wherever it is you're going. But coming back, in my case, certainly I would be looking forward to going home for so long, and then suddenly there I am. And it never measures up, because yes, you are safe physically, and yes, can be comfortable, have a bath, but your mind is still somewhere else, and no one can quite understand where you've been, and you're disorientated, and things seem superficial because you're no longer living on your edge. And very hard. And I think this is why I needed a rest from that life. And I also found I was not coming back to anything. My mum died suddenly when I was quite a few years ago now, and then my dad died. And what was there to come home to? It had always been them, really, who I had a headquarters, as it were, which was just my mum and dad, and various girlfriends and things. But essentially, I was coming home to a tight family who believed in me, and that was gone. And so I think I needed to build up a family base. And I'm married and have got my children now. But some people who know you as you rather than as an adventurer, as a exotic explorer character, that was very, very important. So my wife never really asked me about my journeys. I think she's not interested, actually, but it helped. I think it helps the fact that she's not saying, "Oh, you're so wonderful," because she doesn't think that. She just thinks, "Oh, thank goodness you're back. It's now your turn to do the washing up and do your, cook and look after the children and so on." And that's good, because I'm made to be normal, made to be a productive member of a family. And I think everyone needs to feel they belong. And that's that sense that you touched on, I think, Rob, that you don't feel you belong when you come back. Because if it's a successful expedition, I think you've probably adapted to another world. That's what the whole process was about, adapting to the river, whatever was out there, the crocodiles, the dengue fever. You've had to accommodate all that, this new world. You come back and your mind has accommodated a view of trees or desert, and now you're not there, and that's what's so disorientating. So to be able to plug into the familiar, so vital, and it's what keeps me fresh and on my toes, and I wanted to go away again eventually, because after a while it's too much. But anyway,
it's kind of. I remember I took myself off into the on the Norwegian-Swedish border probably about 15 years ago in about February for, I think, 4 or 5 weeks, me in a backpack, to go and see what's what. It's -40 at night. It's a bit chilly. And I had an incredibly weird 4 or 5 weeks. It's still very first world, which is interesting that you can explore somewhere that's in a first world country, but it's still very wild, remote. And I got very cold and wasn't always very comfortable. And I thought I'd do ice fishing, and that was an unmitigated disaster. And I remember getting back to a Norwegian town called Røros on my last night, before I was going to go and get the train to Oslo and fly back to the UK. And I remember taking off all of those cold weather clothes and putting on a pair of jeans and a jacket and whatever else and being bloody freezing. I was the coldest I'd been for 5 weeks. And then that night I tried to sleep in a bed, and then I ended up sleeping on the floor because the bed just felt horrible. And I can't, it's like the comfiest, least comfortable thing. It's weird. You can't describe it. And I slept on the floor, and then I slept. And as I reflect back on, going to the Himalayas for a few years at a time and whatever else, every time I've come back, that integration, even having conversations with people becomes hard because what they want to talk about seems so insignificant in comparison to what you've been experiencing. They want to talk about struggling to pay for the credit card bill. And I'm like, well, I was actually struggling to eat 2 weeks ago and struggling to breathe 2 weeks before that, maybe, whatever it may well be. Doesn't see. And the people I've spent time with, the Sami there, living still in Lavus, looking after their reindeer in the middle of nowhere in the winter time. It's just, I don't know, it's just a really hard thing to go through. It's necessary, but it's very, very hard.
And that is part of the value of the whole thing, isn't it? I say it's necessary, and it seems so unnecessary, but I think it's what we all need to do. That's why I think these rituals are very important. You're talking about the posa initiation ceremonies and so on. It's being taken away from the familiar, being exposed is very, very valuable because you learn who you are. And people may say, well, if you're in an urban environment, you don't need to know who you are. But it's also part of disconnecting from what sustains us and being exposed to a bigger world that actually also sustains us, because we still need these environments because we're all connected in some way. So I think it's extraordinary. It's sort of almost a mythic thing. It's like Odysseus setting off to discover the world. I think we all need to do it in order to know who we are and to feel our place in the world. To know how we fit into the bigger picture.
So I don't have very many questions left, but up until 5 years ago, I thought that my itch that had to be scratched, which is going to weird and wonderful places and having a wander around. Let's just put it, that'd be my best way of phrasing it. I thought that would be something that I'd have to scratch for the entirety of my days. And then when I turned 40, I became a dad for the first time. And the desire to scratch the itch has changed. And I wonder how becoming a father has affected you or changed your perspective on the world. How does that fit?
I think it does explain some of that gap I had in doing these expeditions. Once I was a parent, I did reevaluate things, and it's a funny thing. I think marrying is one thing, but having children is a very different thing. It's so much more profound because you are responsible. And this is I find it very, very hard now going off on expeditions because I think I feel much more vulnerable, weirdly, because I feel if something does go wrong, then doubts creep in. I feel maybe this will happen, maybe that'll happen, because of course the consequences of me dying are more significant because I'll leave an orphan. So I find it hard. And it's not the same again. It's not quite as joyous heading off because it's not just anymore about what I experience out there. It's thinking of those back home that I'm now leaving. So it has changed things for me. It's not the same. I think partly because of the way my style, which is to be alone, and turning to another culture, immersing myself in another culture, that means I'm excluding my own more. The more you sort of disappear into another place, the less you can be able to sort of contact or mentally embrace the world that you come from. So I sort of feel that absence more. I feel it feels a little bit more painful to turn my back on my own world. Whereas before, as a young person, I just used to head off, and that was that. But now I just feel a little bit of me is always looking backwards. So in my emergency, my survival kit, I always had an exit strategy worked out. I have a bit of paper, as well as the fishing hooks, fishing line, survival gadgets. There'd be a bit of paper saying what to do in an emergency. And this was purely a little bit of paper just to remind me, because you can be very alone, feel very alone if you've been abandoned by guides or shot at or robbed. Sometimes you don't think straight, and it's just very, very good to have a few homely reminders of what you should do. But one of them is always have an exit strategy. And so but this suddenly becomes the most important thing, that where every step forward you go, you're one step further from home and your children. And so the exit strategy becomes my big, big thing that I've got to, it becomes much bigger in my mind. And with that becomes doubt, because I'm not striding forward in the way that I should be mentally and physically, because I'm a little bit of me is looking backwards. So I feel a bit more vulnerable, and I feel more less focused on what I should be doing, because it's quite hard to just be ice cold and say, no, forget about family. Just this, keep yourself alive by focusing on the present. It's just a harder thing to unwrap. So yeah, it's a tricky thing. Don't have children if you if you want to risk your life. But I think there's no easy way. I just have to be extra careful. That's all I can do.
And so there's two sorts of parents out there. What if one of your kids gets to 16, 18? I don't know how old your children are, and they one of them says, "Daddy, I'm going to be an explorer."
Disaster, total disaster. Yes, fortunately, my oldest is 14, and she just wants to shop. So that's that sorted. Although it horrifies me, but anyway, at least she doesn't want that. My youngest is only 6, so she hasn't really thought about it very much. And my Freddie, my 11-year-old, he's the one that might head off. But I have to say, they don't think of it as anything glamorous, what I do. I don't really talk about my journeys very much with my children. But they just see that I'm away. From their point of view, because they're so young, they just think, why am I away? That's sad in a way. So it's my duty to inspire them. But of course, you've got to support your children. You've got to encourage their dreams. That's what my parents did to me. My dad, I remember when I was probably about 10, 11, same as my son, I said to my dad, I'm going to be an explorer when I grow up. And he didn't say, oh, some hope of that, look at you. He didn't say that. He just said, I think it's a wonderful thing to be. And I always remember that encouragement. You've got to try and foster your children's dreams. That's the whole point of being a parent, I think. It's not the entire point, but I shouldn't say that, but it's part of it. You've got to encourage the next generation. But beyond that, I always keep telling them that you are exploring in your own way. And that is important. You don't need to be like me. The world's changed. I've been more remote than it's possible to be nowadays. For weeks and weeks, totally out of contact, and very hard to replicate these journeys that I used to do. And what would be the point? So they will explore in their own way, and I think that's important. We find their own challenges in life, and it may be a crevasse that they want to explore in the Antarctic, or it may be a high street somewhere. But you've got to find your own place in the world and push your own limits and try the best to fulfill your potential.
I love it. So look into the future. We've got your new book coming out next year, Explorer. Tell us about that and how Papua New Guinea almost feels like it's a magnet for you that keeps pulling you back.
Yes, I went through the initiation ceremony in New Guinea, and it made me feel I had a debt to that particular village and that particular culture. I went back time and time again, particularly to that community, to build on that knowledge I had. And it was as if the New Guineans had equipped me to explore the world in general. So the book is about that. It's actually bigger than just that relationship I had with New Guinea. It's about what it takes to be an explorer in the 21st century. We've touched on this, Rob. What is the point of being an explorer? And people question this a lot. When I disappeared in New Guinea years later, a few years ago now, people say, what is he doing out there in this day and age? He's one more posh white bloke, male, typical. There's no sense of people actually looking at any of my books or realizing that for me it's a great duty to record the world and listen to people of different cultures. It was all, oh no, he's another imperialist. It's a lot of this instant judgment. But a lot of people ask the question, so what is the point of exploring? Isn't it all done? And the book attacks, yes, it probably does, but it embraces that question. What is the point of us exploring? And as I've said, I think we're all explorers, and actually explorers are more important now than ever. Not the classic Burton Speak or me as a young man, the character who heads off in the old-fashioned way. It's about all of us realizing our potential, and that potential involves not the familiar but the unfamiliar, the world out there. And not just sort of so-called wildernesses, but just the local river, the local wood. We don't understand these environments that are just on our doorstep, and that also is part of exploration. So that's what the Explorer book is all about. Yes, it is about me too. Yeah.
Well, somebody has to be the star in the limelight, so it may as well be you if you wrote the book. That's got to be the way forward. My final question is, where next? Where do we find you losing yourself next, and when?
Oh, do you know what? I was wondering if you can ask that, because it's placed me in a tricky position. I wasn't going to say anything about it because I do. I'm not going to tell you because I haven't even announced this, and COVID may yet stop it. But the plan is for me to disappear somewhere, and I don't want to be rescued. I don't want anyone to come and get me. I don't want people to worry about me. But I want to try and go somewhere to explore it, to somewhere that means a lot to me, and we'll see whether I can actually go. The idea is January. I've got a slot there that I want to use, and I've got a lot to weigh up personally about my children. I don't want to let them down. At the same time, I don't want to have connection with the outside world. For me, it's very, very important that I disconnect, as I've said. So I will be heading off in January, and yeah, to somewhere, and it may, it may get me into trouble again. I do get into trouble, but the good thing is I've always got out of trouble. So I'm hoping to do the same.
That's all that matters. The getting out of trouble is the only important thing. That's all that matters.
I think so.
Somebody once said to me, it's not being shot at that's important. It's about not being hit.
Oh, I should write that down.
Yeah, that was the guy who I was telling him the story of being shot at by the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda in like 99, 2000. And this is the guy who kayaked across the Atlantic, Peter Bray, sergeant in the SAS. He said, but bullets coming towards you, they don't matter. As long as you don't get hit, that's the only thing that matters. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
It does make sense. But here is the thing. It's luck also plays a part. And you know this, Rob. And so you can push yourself to the limits, and you can feel that you've thought through every scenario that could possibly go wrong. But humans are unpredictable. They're not rational. So the gold miners who chased me with knives in the Amazon, they were drunk. Why they chased me, I still don't know. I've been robbed, as I mentioned, as well, left to die in the rainforest. That wasn't a rational act. So this is the thing, luck. It's a luck sometimes doesn't go your way, and that's what scares me more than anything else. And that's what you sort of have to be ready for. Things could just happen that aren't part of your preparation. And that's the thing that keeps me awake at night. It's never can be totally under control. But there again, that's life.
Look, you can cross the road and a car can come around the corner and knock you over in the next 2 hours. So, I mean, let's not worry about it. Benedict, I want to thank you. And ironically, I want to thank you for going on your first trip, for going to the Amazon, for deciding that was something that was remarkable to go and do for no other reason maybe than just going and doing it. Because I often think that people go and say thank you or celebrate your biggest, most glamorous achievements and whatever else. But actually, it's often that tipping point, isn't it? The first time is the thing that makes or breaks it. So I want to say thank you for doing that first time and producing some really inspirational material on TV and in books for us all to go and say, we can be an explorer too. We don't have to risk life and limb, but we can do it in our own way. And that's truly inspirational. So thank you so much for everything you do.
Well, thank you. It's a lovely thought, actually. And it is true. It's that first step, the hardest. And I was terrified back then, but I was also excited. And it's a question of just having that little bit of courage to make that first step, regardless. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure. So, folks, if you've listened to this and got this far, which I truly hope you have, thank you to Benedict. If you want to follow Benedict on the World Wide Web, there'll be links below to his website, social media, Amazon links for his books and everything else. I encourage you to go and check all those out and see if you can work out where he's going to be going in January. I think he's already let it slip in this conversation, if I'm to be honest, but we'll have to wait and see. Benedict, thank you so much.